America in the 1940s was a black and white world. World War II was raging, and in the words of Stephen Ambrose, the world's greatest democracy fought the world's greatest racist with a segregated army. Even though African Americans fought to defeat oppression abroad, they returned home to be treated as second-class citizens. And even though their music in the form of jazz, swing, and early rock and roll sustained both black and white troops during the war, when black musicians came home and played shows in the American South, they weren't even allowed to stay at the ritzy hotels they often played at. But they were welcome to stay at Fitzgerald's Motel on Carver Street in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Fitzgerald's Motel hosted some of the greatest names in music, such as Billie Holiday and Little Richard. Next door to the motel was a club where these same musicians could be heard playing late into the night. Locals called it Charlie's Place. Charlie's Place was one of the many stops on the famous Chitlin Circuit, a string of clubs, restaurants, and other places that hosted the musicians. Some say rock and roll was born on the Chitlin Circuit. Charlie's Place and Fitzgerald's Motel were both owned by Charlie Fitzgerald, a very successful black businessman. Charlie welcomed both black and white patrons in his club. The white kids who came to hear the music took it back to their community, along with a dance style that they repackaged and called the shag. The integration of blacks and whites, as well as Charlie's success, angered some people. On a hot night in August 1950, a caravan of 26 cars filled with hooded men drove down Carver Street and opened fire on Charlie's place. They kidnapped Charlie, beat him within an inch of his life, and left him for dead. No one was ever convicted of the crime. Charlie's place and Fitzgerald's motel kept going for a while, but Charlie was never the same. Eventually, the black and white world gave way to the civil rights movement and desegregation. Slowly, that vibrant part of town became a vestige of its bittersweet past. Charlie's place is gone, but the shell of Fitzgerald's motel still remains. It was purchased in 2015 by the city of Myrtle Beach, with hopes of bringing back the magic of yesterday to Carver Street.
Take your time, baby. Take your time, baby. Honey, don't you be no fool. Oh, gal, you living with me, baby, and your mind on some other man. Gal, you having your fun, but you may go cold in hand.
Wie viel weißt du von den Menschen um dich herum? Ich meine, wie viel weißt du wirklich? Von deinen Eltern, deinen Freunden, deinen Lehrern. Wo sind sie hin? All die Rebellen, die Querdenker, die bösen Jungs. Was ist aus ihnen geworden? Alles Spießer? Träum weiter. Aber trau keinem über 40.
Ich melde mich, ja? Herr Rat? Morgen. Gutes Wochenende gehabt? Na, nötig hätten Sie es. Ich finde es ja bewundernswert, wie Sie das machen. Morgen. Jetzt noch die ganzen Stunden von Weidmann. Wie viel haben Sie jetzt?
31.
Wie schaffen Sie das bloß?
Ich fand es übrigens großartig, wie Sie neulich im Lehrerzimmer Weidmann verteidigt haben. Dabei kannten Sie ihn doch kaum.
Hat mir sehr geholfen, als ich hier angefangen habe. Sowas vergesse ich nicht.
Haben Sie schon gehört? Jetzt will sich auch noch so eine Frau von ihm scheiden lassen.
Nein, habe ich nicht. Woher wissen Sie das?
Aus der Zeitung.
Frau vom Grabscher will Scheidung.
Also meine Frau. Wir würden Sie gerne einladen zu uns. Hey, sachte, ja? Alles in Ordnung?
Kriegsverletzung.
Ich habe meiner Frau von Ihnen erzählt. Und sie würde Sie auch gern kennenlernen.
Nein, vielen Dank. Das ist wirklich sehr nett von Ihnen, aber ich habe einfach zu viel zu tun.
Vielleicht können Sie Ihren Perfektionismus ja mal ein Wochenende zügeln. Ne? Wir wohnen sehr schön. In Grün.
Ich habe noch was vorzubereiten.
Behalten Sie doch die Zeitung. Dann können Sie sie später lesen.
Also wenn ihr im Weltraum schwebt, ja? Und ihr wollt in diese Richtung, wie macht ihr das? Ihr könnt ja zum Beispiel euren Schlüssel nehmen und ihn da lang werfen. Dann schwebt ihr ganz langsam, wegen des Impulserhaltungssatzes, in diese Richtung. Und wir machen das nächste Mal weiter. Emiliano, alles dabei diesmal? Melanie? Was gibt's denn noch?
3 Punkte. Ist nicht Ihr Ernst, oder?
Ja, tut mir leid. Aber du warst offensichtlich völlig...
Damit falle ich durchs Abi. Wegen Ihnen.
Nicht wegen mir, Melanie. Daran habe ich keine Aktien.
Gefalle ich Ihnen nicht mehr?
Wie bitte?
Ludmilla hat immerhin 7 Punkte bekommen. Mit 3 falle ich durch.
Ja.
Das würde ich an Ihrer Stelle nicht tun. Sonst geht es Ihnen wie Weidmann. Tut mir leid, Herr Rath. Entschuldigung. Herr Dr. Rath. Aber ich brauche diesmal einfach 7 Punkte, wenn ich nicht durchs Abi fallen will. Und wenn Sie mir die nicht geben, dann renne ich gleich aus dieser Tür und lass sie offen stehen. Die ganze 12C steht da draußen. Ich brauche gar nichts weiter zu sagen. Ich werde mich einfach nur den richtigen Freundinnen anvertrauen und morgen weiß es die ganze Schule.
Melanie, mach keinen Quatsch. Das klappt nie.
Bei Weidmann hat's doch auch geklappt. Sie lassen mir keine Wahl. Mein Vater schlägt mich tot, wenn ich durchs Abi rassel.
Ja, ja.
Ja.
Das wusste ich nicht. Aber da kann man doch bestimmt
Kann man nicht. Aber Sie können jetzt den scheiß Rotstift nehmen und da eine verfickte 7 hinmalen. Also. 1, 2.
Weidmann. Was war das also ihr, ja?
Hallo.
C'est moi. Walter.
Lange nichts gehört, mein Freund. Geht's dir gut?
Ich brauche deine Hilfe.
Alles, was du willst.
Danke. Schreinerweg 11. Lass heute Nacht die Garage abbrennen. Ein Defekt, elektrische Leitung, irgendwas. Keine Personenschäden.
Bon.
Die S-Klasse kann abfackeln.
Sehen wir uns?
Ich denke nicht, mein Freund.
Schade.
Salut.
Salut.
Wenn ich dich gleich loslasse, wirst du nicht schreien. Deinen kleinen Plan wirst du vergessen. Du wirst dich hübsch machen, zuknöpfen und da hinten durch den Notausgang gehen. Niemand wird dich sehen. Dann wirst du deine Freundin anrufen und ihnen erzählen, was passiert ist. Du wirst ihnen sagen, wenn dich Susanne und ihre Kollegin nicht bis heute Abend stellen und zugeben, dass Weidmann unschuldig ist, dann werden sehr unschöne Dinge bei ihnen passieren. Ansonsten wirst du niemandem etwas sagen. Wenn das geschieht, blase ich alles ab. Wenn nicht, passiert Schlimmeres. Klar? Ich lasse dich jetzt los und du wirst nicht schreien. Außerdem wird sich jemand mit deinem Vater unterhalten. Ich verspreche dir, der fasst dich nicht mehr an. Und pass auf, dass du später nicht so ein Schwein wirst wie dein Vater. Bist du nicht auf dem besten Wege dahin?
Did you dream of hell? Are you crying? Are you dying? Are you dancing with death? All that blood on your face, is it yours or from someone else? What are you screaming when you're dreaming? Where will you finally go? Tell the people you once loved, they should never follow you where you go.
The way I view the creative process is like a spiral. Spirals are how things grow. For me, the creative process begins, if it could be said to even begin in certain places, it begins with like in a place of, gathering. The images come from a place of stillness. They don't come from a place of activity. They don't come from a place of filling my mind with lots of other people's ideas. All those things get filtered down, but once I'm in a place of stillness, that's when the ideas tend to arise. I think a lot of people have a difficult time with the creative process because they have these ideas, and everybody has ideas, but they don't tend them. Everyone has that kind of like initial impetus, which is like that forward motioning of that creative process. But then there needs to be a tending of that small idea, and so oftentimes a small idea is deemed not as useful or not as interesting or not as important, and so oftentimes those ideas are the ones that kind of get shuffled away. In my view, though, all those ideas are important. What comes up is something completely different. And generally, if you follow it, it leads you to a really special place. My name is Andy Farkas. I'm a woodcut printmaker, and I work primarily in the medium of Japanese mokuhanga. So mokuhanga is a traditional Japanese woodcut process. It's centuries old, and the process itself originated in China. It's a water-based printmaking technique as opposed to oil-based printmaking technique, which is characteristic of Western styles. The Japanese style mokuhanga uses a brush and pure pigment that's in a medium of water that's brushed onto the block itself. Later it introduced the additions of a medium like rice paste, which helps as a binder to hold the pigment to the paper, so that's also mixed into the pigment as well. But all of those things are essentially used to help hold the pigments together and brush it onto the block. The reason that I like the process and why the process is very different is that it allows a lot of freedom and flexibility with how you put the color on the block. So whereas using a brayer and rolling a flat color of ink onto a block, you can actually use a brush and brush specific areas of color. It's, I don't want to say you can't make a gradient with Western style techniques, but you're limited. But with the mokuhanga technique, you can put a gradient wherever you want. You can spot color wherever you want. The colors are luminous, and you can layer them. It looks very much like a watercolor, or it can. You can also get such a high density of pigment in this particular process too that you wouldn't necessarily get in other mediums as well. The reason for that is because you can use pure pigment, and so you can literally like saturate the paper with pigment, and because it's water-based, most of the water will evaporate, and you end up with like this really rich pigment. You get different printing techniques too based on how damp the wood block is, or how damp the paper that you're using is, how much pigment you use, how much rice paste you use. It's really unique every time you do it. It's funny because there's a lot of, it's a very intuitive process in a lot of ways. You have to kind of like feel where you're at and kind of just go with the flow of it. When I first started making these, it was very different because like I had what seemed like very little control over the final product. I didn't know how the colors were going to end up. The colors dry, shades lighter than what you print, as is true with most watercolors. It was a difficult process to control, and it was a good lesson for me as an artist, because you learn, or as a human being really, learn to kind of like let go of certain issues, where to get so attached to a certain way of being or a certain way of doing things. And granted, the process, there is a specific process that the mokuhanga process is, but in a lot of ways, it's always going to be a beautiful mystery, you know, when, you know, to see the end product come through.
So this is just a stone from Japan, a hard stone that I got for sharpening my tools. The tools are Japanese blue steel. For a flat edge tool, flat edge goes down flat, the angled side towards the sharpening stone at first. This pretty much just polishes it up. So again, the angle side down, and for a curved tool, you go in little circles.
Learning to make prints was, you know, in school, or the way that I learned anyway, was that you made a drawing and then you transferred that drawing to a substrate, whether it's a wood block or a metal plate or whatever, and then you would use a means, whether it's carving or etching or scratching into the surface to create a replication of the drawing that you began with. And so while that is helpful for learning the means and the process, it's also really stifling as a creative artist, because, you know, you're essentially recreating a piece of artwork that you've already made. And likely what happens, and what happened with me, was that the print was never as good as the drawing, or at least it never felt like it was. You know, there's something intangible about that direct response from the artist's hand making a piece of art that can't be replicated. You know, so printmaking is a medium that struggles with that, I think, because it removes the artist by, depending on what medium you use, by a number of levels. It's hard to know and put to words what that difference is, or what that difference could be, but it's there. If you look at a drawing versus a print, there's definitely a life there that's not there before. And so when I started rethinking about how I was making prints, I wanted to kind of make it fresh and creative at every moment. And so now I don't transfer my drawings to make a print. I always start with a small, little, rough, very rough sketch. It's hardly anything at all sometimes. And then if I like something, I'll take that little idea and I'll completely redraw it. And I'll redraw it directly onto whatever I'm going to be using, so woodblock in my case. At that point, I give myself the freedom and the liberty to alter it if I want, or to change it, or to elaborate, or to simplify, or essentially do whatever I want. I mean, I'm not limited by the small drawing that I made. I'm kind of like broadening the scope of this idea, and in essence, I feel like at that stage I'm going deeper into what I was originally thinking of, or the original idea. But I don't think it's any accident that I've ended up carving into wood and making woodcuts. That feel of carving into the wood, the grain of the wood itself, and using the grain of the wood to carve, knowing which way to cut and chisel, you can kind of see the essence of what is there to be carved out of it. If I have a concept or an idea, I try to match that up with the wood, and you know, and the carving process itself definitely lends itself to that. And so, like, as I'm being creative, with my lines and with the forms I'm drawing and cutting out, I'm also mindful of like how things are moving. And so when there's an opportunity to use the wood in its natural state in the way that it's going, I use it. And it's always freeing and enjoyable to do that. And it comes out in the final product too. At the very beginnings of my, exploration into like how I view my creative process now, I was playing with the idea of improvisation, and so I started telling myself stories, and it was really exciting. What I loved about telling stories, and like I said, originally I started telling these stories to myself out loud, is that I didn't know the end, before I began, and so when I got to the end of the story, I didn't know, what it was going to be, And it's like that with all the stories I tell to my kids and all the stories that I write. Generally speaking, I'll tell them first, because that's how things kind of flow naturally.
That's a little girl?
Yeah. Do you remember that story?
Tell it.
Oh, the great fish story. It starts out with a little girl, just like you, about your age, but her daddy was a fisherman, and he would take her fishing whenever he would go out. And one day, there was a king's messenger came, and he said that anyone who could...
So this story I first told to my daughters, and just like a lot of my stories, this one it just came to me. And oftentimes, as I'm telling the story, it things just kind of arise. And also oftentimes when I tell stories, especially to my kids, and this is one of the joys of having kids, is you start to recognize things in yourself. You see their needs, their desires, and their wants, and you can't always give them to them, but you can bring a lot to them in the form of story, and I like to do that. And so that's where this came from. For the girls, this is called The Story of the Great Purple Fish. Once there was a fisherman who had a daughter, and every day she would see him off down at the water where all the boats were docked. Early in the mornings, all the fishermen would prepare their boats for the day. The fisherman's daughter would always be waiting as the boats came back to the harbor, and as the fishermen, after a long day on the sea, climbed wearily out to dry land, they would sit and tell the stories of the day. One such day, the fisherman and his daughter were enjoying hearing about a man who had caught a fish that looked like his mother, when up rode two men on horses. One had a long white beard, and the other wore a white cap. The man in the cap spoke. "There is a rumor that there is a great purple fish who lives in the waters near this place. The king has heard of this fish. Its mouth is as big as a bear's cave, and the tail is mighty as an oak tree. This fish is so great and sleek that no man has ever caught it by any means known to fishing. If one were to eat this fish's liver, it would grant them eternal life. Have any of you seen such a fish?" There was silence. The man in the white cap continued. "The king has offered a reward for the capture of this fish, riches beyond measure." And when he finished, the two men rowed off down the coast. "There's no such fish," replied the fisherman to his daughter as she looked on, spellbound by the strange man's description. "Oh, but it is true. There is," came a weak voice from the back of the group. "Legend says there was a man who caught it with his bare hands." The fisherman did not believe the story of the great purple fish, but he could not get the image of the king's reward out of his mind. So one day, and the day after, and the day after that, the fisherman began searching for that great, mysterious, mystical fish. The fisherman soon became obsessed with trying to catch the fish, and he began leaving many of his other responsibilities to continue his search. Soon after, the fisherman became gravely ill, and he was no longer able to fish. And so he passed on his trade to his daughter. And she was every inch a fisherwoman. And so great was her skill that word spread far and wide of her ability. She brought in many fish, much money and recognition for her efforts. And then one night, she had a dream. She dreamed that she was a fish, caught in a fishing net, and she couldn't get out. And then a great shadow passed over her, cut through the net, and freed her and all of the other sea creatures that were held by it. She told her father the dream, and he recounted the story long ago that the old fisherman had told, and which the man in the white cap had come and described. The memory came flooding back, and the girl resolved to catch the fish with her bare hands. The next morning she went down to the shore, and she waded out into the ocean. She watched and she waited. The great fish, there was no sign of it. Weeks passed, and she looked harder, becoming more observant, but still no sign of the great fish appeared. A month passed. She closed her eyes and she listened. She thought she heard it, but listening harder, it was not there. Something moved in the water and she reached for it, but it slipped through her fingers. People she did not know came to the edge of the water and called out, "You're wasting your time!" But she did not listen. Friends came to the shore and pleaded with her, "Come back. You cannot succeed in this." But she did not listen. Finally, her mother came to the sand and sat and cried, "I miss you. I love you. Please come home." But she did not listen. Another month passed. She noticed the sunlight skipped across the water, and the moon melted into the water. She noticed sea creatures coming closer to her and making their homes nearby. Another month passed, and she thought less and less of the great fish. Now she was enjoying the water. She wrapped herself in the sun as it rose above the sea, and the moon as it flowed behind. And she appreciated the simple lives of the creatures that scuttled and darted beneath her legs and feet. The sand was her constant companion, and the crashing waves and rhythm of the tide, an unmatched song and dance. In the evenings, she would dream that she had grown fins and a tail, and swim as fish beneath the waves until she was unsure what was a dream and what was waking. Months passed happily. The great fish was all but forgotten. She had no desire to catch him, only to enjoy the constancy of the nature that surrounded her, until one day all of the sea creatures left. She was alone, but she was not upset. She suspected that they had somewhere to go, and she waited for them to return. A week passed, and they did not. Then, one morning, she woke, and she found the great purple fish nested at her side. Large, purple, sleek, with a great fin on top, and 3 more on each side, a mouth as large as a bear's cave, and a tail wider than a house. The fish bowed to the girl, and having no words, she hugged the great fish, and then she let him go. You know, the creative process is a very selfish process in many, many ways. And my general philosophy in life is that by making yourself better, you make those around you better. So when I make a piece of artwork, for me, it's a process of making myself better. It's coming to a place, it helps me come to a place, I should say, that where I can come to some sort of greater understanding about my own self and about the world around me. And once I make that connection or understanding, I disconnect myself from the artwork and I put it out. It's now out in the world, and people then can take it for what it's worth, you know. And people come to it from different places, and I'm always flattered when somebody appreciates it, because it just means that they're just like me.